First, I need to say I really appreciate and I'm humbled by the opportunity to speak to everyone here today and with this program. It's a fantastic program. And I know, at least I've been told, that there's an anonymous donor as well. I'm not sure who that person or institution is, but whoever it is, you know, this is really important work. Bringing together different people from different walks of life so we can all collaborate on a common issue, common problem. Because a lot of times we don't interact enough on these kind of issues. And so, with no further ado, this is Waimea Kauai. And some people may have heard about Waimea before. Kauai is known as the Garden Island. And it is, perhaps some of you have been there. This is actually the mouth. This is the Waimea River. And this is the mouth of the Waimea Canyon, which has often been called the Grand Canyon of the Pacific. And historically, that agriculture was sugarcane until about 15 to 20 years ago, when sugarcane really became less economically viable and left the islands. And what really moved in about 10 to 15 years ago were the GMO companies. And you had an economic vacuum left by sugarcane. You had largely what they call there, if you live there, a plantation mentality, a plantation economy, where most of these towns, this is an old town, but if you go into a lot of the towns, there'll be small sub-camps, and it'll be called ranch camp, Portuguese camp, Japanese camp. And it's where workers were brought in to work the cane, and then that's where they were situated. And these were classic company towns in the same way that someone's from the American South and elsewhere, California as well, where workers were brought in to work sugarcane. And so the other thing that's interesting about this, so GMO moved in, and what they did is they leased up a lot of the agricultural land. And they used it both for GMO seed production and GMO testing. And in the town of Waimea, this is Pioneer's facility. It's from a long-standing trust. And in Hawaii, a lot of the public lands, a lot of the lands are held by trusts, which some of you may know as well. And so this is their seed testing facility where they try out new branches of genetically modified crops. And this is an older photo, and it's a good one to give you an idea what this case is about. And I'll explain it because if you see, they've basically plowed under large sections of the land, and then they've planted small test plots about the size of maybe a tennis court or a soccer field, and then everything else lays fallow around those plots. And it's important. This gives you an idea of where these fields are with relation to the town. And we have a thing called the trades, the trade winds in Hawaii. If you wanted to go get on your sailboat at the marina and sail to Hawaii, that's what you would take. And these typically blow most of the year in this general direction. They basically blow more or less across the face of Waimea, across the fields. And so the real question for our town is when fertilizers, pesticides, dust, agricultural dust, and all these things come off these fields, and you have a persistent wind direction for most of the year. There's obviously sometimes the wind blows the other way. There's obviously weird wind conditions with respect to the valley. But when you have trade winds, a majority of the year is where are agricultural dust and agricultural pesticides going to travel. Shortly after GMO Pioneer moved into this area, and it's the whole coast. What basically happened is the community started being inundated with dust and smelling chemicals. And this was close to a decade ago, probably more like 12 years ago. And I will show you some pictures in a minute of just how bad it was, but essentially it would cover the windows. If anyone's ever been to Hawaii, there's typically no air conditioning. You usually live with your windows wide open, your doors open, you have your lanais, your jalousies that open, and that's how you cool down. It's so bad that the people in this town have to basically live with their windows constantly open, or pardon me, constantly closed. So they tried everything. They spoke with community leaders. They spoke with the mayor. They spoke with the political establishment of Kauai, and were never really able to get any kind of traction on accomplishing real change. And I mention that because in a lot of cases, and I'm sure this might be one of the questions, there's a varied group here. Some people may be very interested in the way lawsuits get built or have questions about that's fine. You know, other people have questions maybe about the actual case or other issues. But this was a long-standing issue where I came to the table very late in the game. Really 10, 12 years after the issue, we were invited to come over. I was working in Oahu on another case, pesticide case involving a golf course. along with our partner there, an attorney who's born and raised there. And we were invited to come over and meet with this town. And when we got there, people were ready to march with, basically pitchforks and fire up on. In fact, there had already been arrest from some people in the town, or at least police reports filed. And so we actually advise, caution, we need to slow down. We need to talk with this company first. We need to try to see if we can mediate some kind of resolution. And so that's really what we worked on for more than a year in this case. And our community, frankly, I don't know that would have been their first preference. I think a large chunk of the community probably wanted to go ahead and get rolling with litigation. And what we always tried to advise them is that litigation can only accomplish so much. And many times at the end of litigation, people are unsatisfied with the result when they go in with the anticipation that it's going to fix everything, because it can't. And that's a reality of these kinds of cases, this kind of work. So either way, mediation failed ultimately, and so we sued. And we brought suit both on the purpose of the agricultural dust, and by the way, there's a handout, I believe, that attaches some of the complaint, and also the pesticides. And some of these pesticides, these are some of the restricted use pesticides. There are many dozens and dozens and dozens of pesticides used because it's a test facility. And so they are exposing these plants, typically it's corn, these corn plants to large varieties of applications of pesticides most of the year, about 80% of the days of the year. And that's something I probably should have mentioned. One of the reasons why these companies love Kauai or love Hawaii, because this is on all of our islands, we have multiple growing seasons. And so if you're interested in bringing something to market, having or bringing seed and production to the rest of the world or to the United States, having 3 and 4 and 5 growing cycles in a year where you can put these things out and work through it on a quick basis is really important. What that also means, though, as you saw, when you have huge areas fallow and constant application of pesticides, the downwind community will be impacted. And so that's what we brought the suit on. Some of these chemicals, I'll just go through. Atrazine, chlorpyrifos, we've spoken about some of these, you've heard about them. There's many, many more. This is actually a warning for the workers on the field. And it's questionable whether or not any of the workers ever actually see this warning. But it certainly isn't given to the community. And this is going to tie on to what Ms. Reese mentioned. This is what a pesticide, fact sheet. There's lots of different things you could call, I guess, the pesticide labels, the fact sheets. This one's always funny to me because there's always the nice comments at the bottom as far as the growing partnership with nature. And then there's many pages typically of intense stuff. And this is for all the non-specialists who don't see these things very often. Ask yourself, if a label is designed to protect people, not just workers, but people, downwind communities as well, people who are impacted by runoff, how in the world is a label ever going to help anyone if you've never seen it? And there's no mechanism for putting this out into the community. No mechanism for, the people who have their families there, who have their children there, who are canoeing competitively in the river, to ever see this. Either way, this is a list of the environmental hazards. So this is what you see many, many times through the year. I'm sorry for the resolution, but basically this is on the ridge looking across the river, across into the pioneer fields, and you'll see all sorts of farm work, dust coming over. I'll just work through these quickly. Again, agricultural dust, the smell of pesticides. This is a video. This is not from our fields, but it's illustrative of what happens. The soil structure there is very well known. It's red dirt. You can actually buy red dirt shirts. Many cases, the soil structure has been destroyed by sugarcane farming. There's very little topsoil cohesion or other plants that hold the topsoil down. And so when you plow it under and you spray it with pesticides to sterilize it, and you have these constant trade winds, this can be the result. We've talked about a lot today as far as what is environmental law, and this is maybe for the environmental law students. There's a huge regulatory and statutory framework of environmental law, and I'm not the guy to ask about it. I don't know all the ins and outs. It's not my faculty, and I'd be the last to tell you that I'm an expert on that kind of environmental law. But there's an older kind of environmental law that is alive and well and should be considered at these kind of conferences. There is not only a regulatory, statutory role, but there's also a role for the common law. And there's a role, and by the common law I mean by individuals who get upset enough because of the smells, the dust, the impact to their homes, the impact to their children, and decide to bring litigation to vindicate those rights. And that is a tradition that dates back long before our country, that we've essentially borrowed from Europe, from England and even beyond Germanic tribes. There's all sorts of precursors. I'm not a legal historian, but legal historians could be very interesting and give lectures just on that. So this common law option, as far as bringing a lawsuit on behalf of these people, is what we chose to do, asserting claims along the lines of negligence and trespass and nuisance. They're also called torts. Some people question as far as, well, what is negligence? And this is a very old case. It's very well known. It's basically called the Paisley Snail, where two women went to get a bottle of beer in England long ago. One poured ginger beer over I think it's over ice cream, and the other one took a drink and poured it out, and there was a decomposing slug in it. And before then, she might not have had a role to bring a lawsuit because she actually hadn't purchased. There's no contract between her and the manufacturer. And so he talked about, but he found basically in the law, and in this case he actually goes back to, the rule that you're supposed to love your neighbor. He found that that's the basis for liability for what happened to that person. And the basis that it is to love your neighbor is the same thing as to protect your neighbor. And so that's really historical precedent, I guess, and many times as far as what we're doing. This is more from Oliver Wendell Holmes as far as the business of laws or torts. And the reason I put these quotes up here is to emphasize that regulatory environmental law, statutory law has accomplished great things in the 40 years or so since the EPA. But it's one piece of the puzzle. And oftentimes people, communities, academics, experts, even lawyers overlook the fact that there's a whole other area that is available. And in fact, it's the historical basis for it. Historical basis for how communities used to seek redress and used to come in and say, to put it in front of a jury, and would go to people like you in this room and say, we don't think that this is fair, and ask them to render a decision to protect their rights. Everyone wants to talk, we can have a discussion about it. But what about tort law? Why aren't you doing it for the money? Why aren't all these cases settled, and so they never really go to the jury, and so there's no real result? I'll show you this picture. I want you to compare this picture. This is since we got involved for this community. And really once we got involved, you can ask for why they did it, but there's cover cropping across the fields. There is the dust fence. Has it fixed everything? Has it fixed the pesticide use? No. But by people standing up for it and taking a stand in court and banding together and all the working together as a community, there are real positive benefits that can occur. I guess this is one of the last points I want to bring up. There's been lots of different issues that have been talked about today, whether it's sustainable agriculture, whether it's environmental justice of a poor economic area, whether you're talking about the companies who say we can do it because it's regulated, it's okay, and what these levels are. All these things have to then get condensed, often by somebody like me, without the expertise, on behalf of a community like this, without the expertise, and pull all those expertise together and pull all these issues together to try to accomplish something. And so, again, I just really appreciate the opportunity to speak today. Thank you very much.